And so we have 36% saying yes, they're using it, 36% saying no, and 29% saying not yet, but planning on using it. So there we go.
So in other words, I have no clear audience.
Lots of interested people, though, 60%.
That's fine.
Okay, so you should have an option now, Brian, to share your desktop.
It's not popping up. Am I just being stupid?
It could be just in the background somewhere.
Let's see. No, let's see. There's probably just something to do it.
Okay.
No.
Attendee.
I think I'm just being dumb.
I'm going to make my...
How about if I do that? Click to share your screen.
There you go. And your audio is good, so I'm going to mute myself, but I'm here if there are any issues. And we'll...
You guys see the...
Operations Manager Suite slides.
Yeah. Do you see the GoToWebinar?
No.
In there?
No, just the slides.
Okay, cool. So it's I see it. So as long as you guys don't see it, then I don't care.
Okay. All good.
Okay, well, cool. So let's see. I think I'm going like 45 minutes. So okay. So hello to everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Brian Wren. I'm with our content team at Microsoft. If you've pretty much done anything with management packs, probably over like the last 10 years, you probably have used some documentation by me, training, something like that. I wrote all the MP authoring guide and that sort of thing. But I moved over to the OMS team. I guess it's been a couple of years now. I started out doing a bunch of the content for Azure Automation and then did some for logging analytics, and really now I'm starting to work on kind of scenarios across the suite and doing custom management sort of thing. That's why I titled this, I know, as MP University, and so I figured typical audience here is the survey showed that it's going to be a combination of people who know it well, some maybe haven't seen it all, and so it's kind of a, what I want to do is go through kind of an overview, an intro to OMS, but more in the context of its relation to Ops Manager and System Center, and why did we create this thing, and where are we going with it. And I think there's a misnomer that OMS comes along and we sometimes get the mistaken assumption that, okay, that's the new one, so at some point I move off System Center and go to OMS, and that's really not the case. So hopefully I'll be able to kind of put it in context. This is all, I'll admit that some of the stuff I'm presenting here is really brand new. Just we're still kind of trying to figure out, certainly all of our content on here's how you use OMS, here's how you use the features, etc. That's fairly straightforward. But one of the things we're seeing a lot of questions on, and we're trying to do a better job of getting this information out, is pretty much what I said. When should I be using one versus the other? I do this today in OpsMan. How do I do it in Log Analytics? And the answer may be, well, we don't really do that in Log Analytics. And so we're really trying to do a better job of creating kind of this level of content to make this transition both conceptually and technically more straightforward. So this is kind of a first attempt at kind of delivering this type of content. So I'll forgive me a little bit if I stumble through it a little bit. It's the first time for that. Then the management solution stuff that I'm going to show, which is kind of the functional equivalent of management packs. This is brand new, and we're still working on this. I'm starting to put some content out. I'll show you one of the sample solutions that I'm working on that will be the basis for some content, some guidance. That's all very much still under development by me, by the product team, the whole bit. So I'm going to kind of let you in on where we are now and what we're looking at doing with this stuff and some of the challenges we're looking at, that sort of thing. That's my email address on screen. That's my Twitter at the bottom, MP Author, not to be confused with Silex MP Author product, just a coincidence in naming. But please follow the Twitter. Anything I put out, I always send a tweet out about it. Mail me questions, comments. You're not finding stuff you think you should, please, right? Definitely like to hear from people. So with that, I'll kind of charge forward here. So first off, a minor bit of history is to help put in context of what OMS is and why we have it. If we look back at System Center, obviously we're all familiar with OpsMan. Familiar with this concept of System Center? It's a suite of related products, all with kind of their own history of how they came into this. And look at like OpsMan, which back to around 2000 is when I started with it, 2005, and I think 2007, that's when we did the complete re-architecture, went to this kind of state monitoring and health models, and that's when management packs as we know them today really were created. And if you look right around 2007, that's about the time that the suite basically took shape. And not everything was in there. Certainly Orchestrator wasn't there yet. I think the Opalis purchase was a couple years off. And there's obviously that slide there isn't trying to show every single, obviously there are other products in there. But right around 2007 is probably when we started to really get into this concept of a set of management products forming a suite. But if you think back in 2007, we were really dealing all with on-premise. Everything was in data centers, right? And we had certainly virtualization, VMware, getting into Hyper-V, and of course that's where Virtual Machine Manager came from. But everything was primarily data center. And really when you think of the history of System Center, these were on-premise products created for an on-premise world, basically, for managing on-premise resources. And then certainly then, a couple years later, the cloud comes along, and we obviously adapted to it, right? I mean, watched the ending of John's presentation there, and he was showing some of the interaction there, some of the management packs that we're delivering to manage cloud resources. We delivered years ago the Azure Management Pack to collect information from the cloud. Orchestrator can manage Azure resources as well. But still, really what we were looking at, what we're still primarily looking at today, is what we would call infrastructure as a service. This is primarily where we see customers are, or IaaS, as we often hear it called. And basically what we're doing is we're taking these on-premise applications and services and we're moving them up into the cloud, typically in VMs, right? Same functional type of application, same basic requirements. We still have lots of VMs running Windows and Linux, and we have services to monitor and patches to do, and many of those same tasks are the same that they were on-prem. What we expect over time is that we'll see customers start to move more towards what we call platform as a service, or PaaS, where we're starting to leverage more of those cloud services. So for example, instead of having a set of VMs running IaaS, we'd start to use web services in the cloud, and we'd start to see those number of VMs start to fall away. Now we're doing much more typical cloud, right? And of course there are lots of barriers to getting this done. We still have security issues and everything else. We expect over time that we'll start to get more and more into this cloud type of world. And so this is really where OMS got created. So where System Center was an on-prem suite for an on-premise management, OpsMan is really, or OMS is really a set of cloud services for a cloud world. Now, multiple ways to look, and I know John, I think mentioned something about this. I caught at the tail end and mentioned my presenting this, which I'm going to. One way to look at OMS, and this is what I would call from a sales and marketing standpoint, are these 4 different offerings, and this is how you license, how you purchase OMS. And each of these represents essentially some category of tasks that you want to perform, right? Insight and analytics, which is basically you want to do monitoring. Okay, that's a fancy name for that. Automation and control, I want to automate resources, deploy resources, enforce configurations, etc. Protection and recovery, which has to do with data backup, recovery, high availability, etc. And security and compliance, looking at threat modeling and ensuring our security patches are up to date, that sort of thing. Now what's interesting, and I know that John mentioned this as well, that each of these offerings are not only giving you the Azure services, but also System Center. So if we take Insight and Analytics, for example, among the things primarily you get log analytics. You also get some different solutions. I'll talk a little more about solutions. I know John showed App Dependency Monitor, which is actually about to be renamed to Service Map, but that's part of Insight and Analytics. But we also give you an Ops Manager license. And the reason for that is a real acknowledgement that in today's world, we're not saying that everybody drop OpsMan and move up to Log Analytics. We fully realize that today there are things that OpsMan does that Log Analytics doesn't do that it may not do, right? It does state, as I mentioned, it does state monitoring. You have a health model. There is no health model in log analytics. We have full alert management. We have this very granular monitoring, which is really not something that log analytics does. Whether it gets there, we'll see, right? I mean, as we gauge where customers are going and where their monitoring requirements are going in the cloud, that's most likely where those products will go. But licensing these together is a real acknowledgement that we're not saying drop one and move to the next, but we really understand that the entire industry is really kind of in this transition period, and we understand that we really need many times the services of both in order to accomplish these requirements. So if we look, the other way to look at OMS, and this really, when you think of this audience, which is a lot more of a technical audience, is most likely going to look at it, are the individual services. And these are all services running in Azure. So we have Log Analytics, again, functional equivalent of Ops Manager, and that's the one that I'll be talking about primarily for the rest of the time. Azure Automation, functional equivalent of Orchestrator. Difference is runbooks totally based on PowerShell and running in the cloud as opposed to a local server. And then we have backup, which is your kind of the functional equivalent, I guess, of BPM, which is basic data backup and recovery. And then site recovery, which has to do with high availability. So for instance, if a data center comes unavailable, we can fail over to another. Now, what's kind of left out of this picture, you might think, is, well, what about this security and compliance, right? There's no service. We have 4 offerings, and I show 4 services up there, but there's 2 backup recovery ones, and there's none for security. And the answer for that, and I saw that John showed some of this as well, which is great, is we're delivering that through what we call a solution. And a little bit of a tricky to define exactly what a solution is. It's not necessarily the direct equivalent of a management pack, and I'll get into what I mean by that. We'll talk about solutions in a couple of different contexts in a few slides. But the basic idea is a solution is leveraging these other services. So we deliver security and compliance primarily by collecting a bunch of data from our agents, from our systems out there, using log analytics, right? So we install these solutions. They instruct log analytics. I need you to collect all the security information for me, security events, patch levels, etc. And then we're going to use log analytics query engine in order to analyze that data and then present visualizations and reports based on that. And so when you really think of another kind of fundamental difference between our previous world, where in this on-prem world we tend to have these large applications with lots of different features in them, in the cloud world, we tend to more, kind of the analogy that I like to use is it's more along the lines of apps on your phone or on a tablet, where they're really more targeted. And when we put together some management scenario, I'm going to be selecting from multiple different services. So when you think, for example, of just one very, very common thing that we do in a management pack is I'll run a script to collect up some monitoring information, so some monitoring data. Log Analytics has no means at all to run a script. It doesn't have a scripting engine. It never will have a scripting engine. It doesn't need one because we have Azure Automation. That is a scripting engine. It allows us to create runbooks. Azure Automation has access to the data in Log Analytics. It has access to write data to Log Analytics. So from that standpoint, we're going to go leverage that service along with Log Analytics to perform this particular scenario. And that starts to give a little bit more of a kind of this different concept of leveraging these different services. And when we start to build our own solutions, which I'll talk about last, it's a matter of basically packaging up these different resources. So, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cold, which is horrible timing, but I think I'm doing fine if I just keep drinking some water here. Let's kind of want to delve in. There's some really fundamental differences as we start to think about this Ops Manager versus Log Analytics and what each one does well and kind of some fundamental differences between them. This slide here, nobody on this call is going to see anything that they don't already know on this slide, right? This is just a basic way that Ops Man works, right? We deliver management packs out to agents, Windows agents, Linux agents, whatever. Those management packs include hundreds, if not thousands, of these very targeted workflows. And each workflow knows what data it wants to collect and what it's going to do with that data. So I may go out to the event log, Windows event log, for instance, and I want you to collect an event. If I see an event with this particular number, I want you to raise an alert. Or I want you to sample this perf counter. If it crosses a threshold, I want to set a service state, or health state. Or maybe I want you to run a script and set a health state that way, right? Every single one of those workflows knows what data it's going to get and what it's going to do with it. And then, of course, all that information goes into the OpsMan database and then typically accessed through the console with our views and our dashboards and reports, etc. Right? So again, nothing you don't already know. Log analytics works very differently. It's the same fundamental concept, but it's almost an opposite type of way that we do this. So the center of the world, as far as log analytics is concerned, is this repository. We probably should call it the log analytics repository, but we typically call it the OMS repository, and I guess the name is just stuck with us. But in any event, everything to the left of that repository is data collection. Everything to the right is what we're going to do with that data. So rather than a bunch of workflows that know what data are going to get and what to do with it, in the log analytics world, we first start by just collecting data. We have no idea if it's good, bad, or otherwise. We don't care. We just collect data. So if you see the connected sources I have out there, some of that is exactly the same Windows agents and Linux agents. In fact, it's exactly the same agent. I'm sure most people have already seen that. If you look at the settings now for the OpsMan agent, you have an OpsMan tab and a log analytics tab for connecting directly to either one. So we do our configuration over in log analytics. I'll show that where we do that. We deliver that information down to the clients to tell it what data to collect. But it's going to be much more general. So instead of saying, for instance, I want to look for this particular event, we're just going to say I want everything in the application event log that's an error or warning. Or I want everything in the system log regardless of what severity it is. Much higher level, we're just going to collect all that data in. In addition to agents, we could have other sources. We have Azure Monitoring, Azure Diagnostics. I'm showing their runbook in Azure Automation because, as you'll see, it's what we consider a common scenario. But that's using something we call the Data Collector API. So this is a REST API that essentially allows any client that can call a REST API to write data into log analytics. Right? So all of the idea is we have all these methods to get data in, these different sources, and we're just going to collect it. Everything in the repository is stored in a record. Records have different types, and each different type of record, of course, has its own set of properties. Whether it's an event, perf data, heartbeat, solutions will have different record types. Everything in there is a record. And what that allows us to do is take all these different types of data and analyze them together, analyze them in different ways. So now we move to the right of that diagram. That's what we're going to do with the data. Okay, basically the goal one of log analytics is just collect all this information. The log search is really the first step in getting data out. And this is really where you start to get into the true value of log analytics, is this very rich query language that allows us to go across these millions of records and do analysis on them, extract data we want, aggregate the data, look at interesting data, say, which I'll show a little bit of. Now those log searches, we can just go and do a bunch of ad hoc analysis, and I'll show a little bit of that. We could base a dashboard on it. Right? So much like the dashboards we see in OMS today, or in OpsMan today, I can show some, graphs or some different visualizations based on these fairly complex log queries extracting interesting data. I can base alerts on these, right? So run this query every 10 minutes. If you see this condition, I want an alert. Now, I'll stop there because that's a critical point, right? Alerting is one of the main things that we do in OpsMan. And if you think in the OpsMan world, think of just install a management pack and the hundreds of different alerting conditions you have that you never define. The management pack basically defines when we're going to get alerts. When it raises the alert, we can manage the alert. We can tell it when we're going to close it, who's responsible for it, etc. Alerting here in log analytics really just said, I'm going to create an alert record, which goes right in the repository with everything else. Now, we also have responses. I can send an email based on that. I can call a runbook, I could call a webhook, but it's a much more simplified type of alerting, right? So this is not something where we're going to probably have hundreds and thousands of these alerting conditions. It's going to be more general, right? If we see something in the application log that's an error, I need you to tell me about it. So this starts to illustrate this difference between the two, where in the log analytics world, it's going to be this kind of higher level, general type of criteria that I'm doing, versus the OpsMan level where it gets very, very granular. Hey, who's the moderator on here for a quick sec?
Hi, Brian.
Hey, just this is awkward as can be, but I have a gardener who's about to start outside. Can you give me 30 seconds to send him away?
You bet. You bet. We'll take a look at questions.
Otherwise, everybody's going to hear a lawnmower run by.
No problem. Okay, so there's a brief moment to maybe adjust your headset, and let's take a look and see if we've got some questions. Looks like we have lots of questions. I'm sure Brian will want to take a look at that. And okay, yeah, we've got tons of questions on here. This is good. So just a couple of reminders. I will be having a draw at 4:15 for one copy of MP Author Professional, as well as another draw for an Xbox. So hopefully you will stay on till the end for that. If you'd like a one-on-one presentation of any of the select applications we demonstrated today, you're welcome to send an email and request that. And we will be making recordings available afterwards, as well as a download link for MP Studio, so you can test it out yourself. There'll be an evaluation license sent with that as well. I think Brian is back now.
I'm back.
Very good.
Sorry about that. Kind of awkward.
Not a problem.
Okay, so anyway, the point made there, and I'll continue showing that. And obviously, we can also do exports out to Power BI. We can export to other, for additional analysis. Okay. So we keep saying this word solution, and there's really in our world, in the Microsoft world, we describe solutions in two ways. We kind of fundamentally, we have what we call a first-party solution and a third-party solution. The first-party solutions are the ones that we create, and they're included as part of these different offerings. And I'll show basically, a couple of clicks, boom, they're installed, they're running, and these are most of the ones that you're going to see demonstrated. In addition to that, we have solutions that we can build ourselves, and that's what I'll get into last. Okay, so we'll talk about these a little bit separate. We're really still kind of trying to figure out how we present these and how we talk about them. And so in any event, we're trying to improve on that. But in any event, the way that you can think about a solution is it really extends the functionality of OMS. And fundamentally, there are basically three different things that a solution will do. First off, it may collect additional data. So in addition to the event logs that we're getting, we may be doing some additional analysis. I'm sorry, I'm still getting, I apologize. I think there was confusion here. What? Stop! No! Turn it off! No!
You have to have a sense of humor. So you do what you've got to do when the guys are out cutting grass, right? So
I'm sorry.
You're good now.
We're good. I apologize. That Anyway, it was horribly distracting to me as well. So in any event, okay, so solutions. The first thing that a solution may do is collect additional data. And this could be both, like if I install a security solution, it may say I want you to collect these security events, for example, and things out of security logs. Or we may be doing, accessing other systems and, collecting what other data that's not available through my normal data sources. Okay? And of course, those are stored right in the repository along with all the other records. Second thing they'll do is perform data analysis. Now, this is where we're really going to see the difference between a log analytics and an OpsMan, right? And so when you think of like the OpsMan world, certainly can do some security analysis and make recommendations, etc. But usually this is done, for instance, we'll go run a script against a domain controller, for instance, and say, hey, we found these particular conditions. It's really kind of this point in time. What's interesting about the analysis that solutions can do is basically they've got this repository. Remember, we've already collected the data. So they can look across trends. They can look across over time. You know, okay, we've seen this sort of trend starting to develop. This could be a potential security threat, for example. So it's this really performing this rich analysis that many of the solutions are able to do, where a lot of this real value comes in. And the third is really just to add additional functionality, right? I mean, John showed App Dependency Monitor, which is an entire, new console, new functionality in the whole bit. Now these are, again, the Microsoft solutions that we're developing. So it's a little, you think, well, it's a kind of like a management pack, but kind of not, because they're not really as well defined. I can't break these open and look at them. But their real advantage is, and I'll show in a moment, these things can be added to your workspace and in and running in absolutely no time. So in any, like I said, I think John showed them to some extent, and I'll give a little bit more into that. So before I go jump into doing some demo, let's talk a little bit about basically using these two together, which is really what it is. This is what we're seeing customers doing, right? If we have OpsMan today, we'll bring up OMS. Let's start to use those together. And John already kind of showed you the mechanics of getting that done. Since this was MP University, I thought it made sense. Let me give you a little bit more insight into how this works, right? I've done management packs for years. I've taught people, and one of the big lessons I always try to give is, down there on the agent, all the agent does is it processes management packs. That's it. There's no magic going on. And so when, of course, my very first question when I saw this integration is I wanted to know, okay, how is this? It's got to be a management pack eventually hitting the agent. And sure enough, it actually is. So basically, I have OpsMan today. I have agents talking to it. I go and I add in, go sign up for Log Analytics. I go through the configuration, connecting the two together. I do some configuration in Log Analytics, say here's some data that I want to collect. Now what's going to happen is that's going to get delivered down onto a management server as a management pack. Basically, when you make that connection with Log Analytics, management packs get installed in OpsMan that basically start polling your Log Analytics workspace. And when they see, there's new configuration to pull down, or look, you added a new solution. Some of the Microsoft solutions will actually have management packs with them that get pulled into, if you have a connected management group, we'll pull those down. Of course, once I have a management pack at the management server, that's going to get delivered to the agent. Now, as far as the agent knows, I just got a management pack that told me to collect some stuff. No different than anything else. Okay, now what is different is those management packs use some special modules that understand they are not sending data into the OpsMan database, but instead they're sending it into a cache that goes on a management server. This data does not get committed into the OpsMan database. It gets cached on the management server and then delivered up into the repository. Okay, and if all we're talking about is data sources here, Windows events, syslog, perf data, etc., this is how it looks. There's no communication from agent to Log Analytics, no need to change firewalls or anything like that. But there are solutions. Okay, now I should probably show this really as I redo this slide. It should really show a management pack provided by a solution, because that's really meant to be a management pack there. But some of those management packs may have to communicate directly to the repository. Some may go through OpsMan, in which case, and this is one of the things we found that customers are struggling a bit with, that they'd install a solution and they'd find, wait a minute, all of a sudden this agent is trying to talk to Log Analytics as opposed to going through my management group. And it really is just a case-by-case basis on the different solutions. As a content team, we're trying to get better. We've done a decent job now of documenting all the different solutions and then defining which ones require that direct connection. It's something I'm going to admit that I think we need to improve a little bit at. But it's important to understand that before you deploy a new solution, is to understand if it's one that's going to require that direct connection. Okay? So with that, let's not get into management. So I'm giving my thunder away. So let's show this a bit. right? And I think John already showed it to you to some extent. Let me kind of build on what I was talking about. So we basically have two consoles today. We have the OMS console, and this is how you always viewed log analytics. And of course, it always gets a little tricky because it says OMS, but really you're looking at log analytics. It's also in the Azure console, okay? Much of these same views, if I go into the Azure portal, I go to Overview, I'm basically looking at the same screen. Now the difference is, basically we can do analysis here, we can read, we can look at things, we can do log queries, but we can't do any configuration, we can't save any elements in the Azure portal. That you can only do on the OMS portal. So that's where I'm going to stay for now. I'll switch over when we do the custom solutions. Over time, we expect the OMS portal will slowly go away and everything will get into the Azure portal. But basically what I'm looking at here are different views for all the different solutions that I have installed in this particular workspace. So for instance, go into the security and audit one, which is a fairly sophisticated one, and we see all this really set of data. This is actually quite a bit of data considering that I added this, I think, 3 hours ago, right? And the way, well, let me continue this before I show how to add them. But basically we can see, right, the type of analysis. I'm not going to sit here and do a complete overview of it, right, but we get a pretty sophisticated analysis of all this information. No threats detected, I hope not. It's just my simple little test environment. And they even give us a bunch of sample queries that we can use when we do log queries, and I'll show log queries in a moment. Okay, so that's just an example of one of the solutions, and of course we could just sit here. I think John showed anti-malware. I could go see, I mean, we could just sit here and pick which ones we go into, right? But we see the kind of rich dashboards and visualizations, and a lot of this is just based on that analysis through the log queries. So with that, let me show, well, in fact, let me back up here first. Let's show where we get this data from, because I was talking about this configuration. So first off, you can see right here, and of course I'm giving away my secrets with my IDs, but the rest of the numbers fall off the right side, so it's not a big deal. But you can see I basically have 3 Windows computers attached here, but in reality, I just have a management group attached, right? If I click that management group, you can see these are the 3 servers, the 3 agents that are actually connected to my management group. Those I never really told OMS about them. I just connected my management group, went through the configuration that John showed you, they came along with it. Okay. For the data that I'm collecting though, this shows, here's the Windows event logs I want. Notice this is pretty high level. This is as granular as we're going to get. Now I can go ahead and type in another name here. Whatever application, if there's a custom application logs your application used, not a problem. Any event log we can go ahead and add here. Right? Windows performance counters, I define the counters. This 10 seconds would be certainly not something I'd recommend in an Opsman world, but this absolutely is something that we can scale to. The other big advantage of log analytics is we have cloud level storage and you know, compute power. So we're able to take these millions and millions of records and actually analyze them quite effectively. So again, this is just defining data collection, right? I haven't done any analysis with this yet. I haven't defined if this stuff's good or bad. But when I get down to the log queries, this is where this analysis engine really starts to show off. Now, I can type in a query. You can see here all these previous queries I've done. Or you can use some of the helpers here. I can click favorites, and I can see a whole host of queries that have been provided to me by solutions that I have installed. I'm going to go ahead and hit this one, which is all data by type. So this just shows here all the different record types and how many of each. Pretty obvious here. Now what's interesting, I have well, in fact, let me change this to by computer, and you can see my entire workspace here has 4 computers in it. This one here is just my local desktop that's reporting straight to log analytics, and these 3 are lab servers that I've had running maybe a couple days to go through Opsman. And you look at the number of records in there is pretty high, right? I'm already in the several million records here, mainly through perf for obvious reason. They're collecting every 10 seconds. I click on that. I can start viewing these. Right? This shows one particular perf record. Performance data actually gives me some other tools where I can start looking at metrics and do drill down on this stuff. I say, well, I only want to see those with processor in them. Notice as I'm using the UI here, it's changing my query, right? And it's a good way to learn the whole query language. If I say, well, I only want percent processor time, I'd like to see expand this one out and see that in a graph view, right? So you can sit here and play with this all day long, quite honestly, and you'll see entire sessions done just showing you interesting queries. But like I said, clicking around here is a very good way to learn this entire language, and all data being extracted from the repository are coming through log queries, okay? And just really the final point, if you look through these different types, again, this comes from the SQL assessment solution here. You can see security events that the security solution provided. The stock quote one, that's my little sample solution that I'm working on that just does stock quotes, right? That I'm going to show you in a second, which is really just not meant to be useful, but just meant to be learning. I have heartbeats, right? So just checking on the heartbeat of agents. We know that we do heartbeats in the OpsMan world just to tell us if an agent is there or not. Again, all data in log analytics we're going to store as records. Okay? Oh, one other thing I wanted to show here is alerts. So any query that I run, so let's just do this one here. There's a performance query. Okay, show me computers available memory. Okay, now let's say I wanted to create an alert based on this query. I click alert. I give it a name. I basically go through. I'm not going to sit here and describe the dialogue. But this is the query that we're running. Say I want to run that every 15 minutes. And if we see results, basically, then I can take these actions. Okay, it's definitely going to create an alert record for us. But then I may send an email, fire a webhook, or fire a runbook based on that. I can go look at alerts that I've defined right here. Now, I have one for my little stock thing that I'm working on. These other ones came from the security solution that it defined, right? So you can see basically it says here we have computers missing security updates. We're going to run this every 5 minutes. If we find something interesting, we're going to send you a mail. But compare this to an OpsMan management group, and there are pretty few alert conditions here in comparison, right? So again, you're kind of seeing this difference between this real heavy analysis analytics tool versus OpsMan, which is doing its real granular, okay? So let me switch back here. I'm going to go one more slide, and I want to give you an idea of where we're going with custom solutions. Since this is MP University, let's kind of finish it up with what is the kind of the cloud version of a management pack. So now, the first solutions I was talking about, those are what we would call the first-party solutions, or the ones that Microsoft provides, where we can really do a lot of things that, kind of outside of context. But remember I mentioned before that in the OpsMan world, when I create a management pack, everything is within OpsMan. I tell you all the things that we're going to put in there. I give you strict rules about what you're allowed to include. But in the Azure world, in the OMS world, I'm basically going to pick and choose which services that I'm going to use to perform some particular function. Now, but we think of the most common management scenario that we expect to see out there, the most common kind of custom management scenario that the customers are going to want to provide. Okay, we have our repository. Everything is going to come down to data coming in and out of the repository. And what we think is a really common scenario is we're going to have runbooks in Azure Automation, because it is our automation engine. Start a runbook, go collect information, whether it be from our Azure resources, maybe connects externally to AWS to get some things from your Amazon cloud, or we also have the ability, if you're not familiar with Azure Automation, something we call Hybrid Runbook Worker that allows us to run runbooks actually on agents within your own data center. So we can even do that. So basically these runbooks can have the ability to collect a whole variety of data, but then they use our data collector API to write to the OMS repository. Well, once I have a runbook that I'm going to use, I'm probably going to create a schedule. So I want to run that. I want to run you every 10 minutes to go collect this data, collect this up. In the case of my sample one that I'm doing, it's my stock quotes. I run it once an hour, collect stock quotes for a certain set of symbols, and it writes that data. Now, again, as you get familiar with Azure Automation, we have these other assets. We have variables where we can store common data that runbooks are going to use. We have credentials, which are kind of like the run-as accounts in Opsman, where we can store secure information, connections, which are kind of similar to the connections in Orchestrator. So all these different assets will go into basically building this particular solution that I need. But then once I collect that data, I want to look at it, right? And when I said, when you get the data out, it's always going to start with a log search. So I may provide one or more log searches that extract this data and show it in different ways, and that's going to happen in log analytics. And of course, if I'm going to provide some log searches, I probably should add a dashboard or two that visualize that data. So now if you look at everything I have on here, you can do right now. You don't need anything called a management solution in order to do what I just showed. Right, but what's interesting is if I go and create all this stuff, it's basically just included with everything else. I have runbooks that are sitting alongside my runbooks that do all these other things. I could set this stuff up for someone. They could come and modify a schedule or modify a runbook and break the whole thing. So what's interesting to us is to basically package this thing up. And this is what we're calling a management solution. Now, management solutions really are implemented as ARM templates. If you're familiar with ARM templates, ARM is just Azure Resource Manager. It's a way for us to manage sets of resources in Azure. An ARM template is basically a JSON file that defines these different resources. Instead of installing them individually and configuring them, I can define them in an ARM template, simply install the template, everything gets deployed. Okay? So what we're doing with solution, basically, if you know how to write an ARM template, you pretty much know how to write a solution. What we're adding to it is we're basically creating what we call a solution resource that will basically lock all these other resources. So if I had a solution like the one I'm showing there, and this is the one I'm going to show a little bit. I know I'm pretty tight on time, but I can give a quick intro to the one I'm building. I'm in the process of building, and it includes all these resources. I can install them as a unit. When I remove the solution, they'll all go away. If you tried to modify my runbook, it would reject it because this is locked by the solution. So basically what it allows us to do is manage these as complete solutions instead of a set of kind of semi-related resources, and it allows us to now start to provide those to customers, to partners, put them in the Azure Marketplace and our Azure Quick Start templates, where customers can basically go through that same experience of, hey, there's a solution sounds interesting to me, a few clicks and some UI, and it's deployed. Okay. I'm right at time here. I was going to take like 5-10 minutes to quickly show this. Is that cool?
You bet, Brian. Take your time.
Okay. I think we've got everybody on, so hopefully I'll give you guys a quick rundown on this because I think it's fairly interesting.
Good stuff. And we've got some questions for you after as well, Brian.
Okay, great. I'll take as long as you need.
Okay.
Okay, so if we look here under solutions, now you're going to see a couple of solutions in here. This is the same log analytics workspace as I showed you in the OMS console. But you see this other one here called stocks. You see this one called SQL Azure Monitoring Solution. These are solutions written like I'm talking about, what we would call a third-party solution. We're trying to figure out a way to distinguish these things and describe them better. But if you go into mine here, I'm just going to show this one. I'll describe both these and what they are. This is the one I'm working on. And you see, look, this includes some resources. These are actually some runbooks. There's still something in the UI here. I should be able to click on this and see this stuff, and I don't. I've got to let somebody know about this. But what this includes, if we go out here to Azure Automation, and I go to this set of runbooks, this here, this stocks collect quotes, that's part of my solution. Now if I try to say delete here, and I hope I'm deleting the right one, so this one, okay, good. So we see deletion error. That's because it's locked by my solution, right? When I remove the solution, it'll go away. But this prevents anyone from messing with it. Okay. Now to show a little bit more on this particular one is fairly interesting because this uses, yeah, that's it. Wait, I'm seeing something very strange there. Let me do this. I should not have seen that. Something very weird happened here. That's all right. I can go over here. I've got it in another place. I can show off this script. But what I want to show is this runbook actually uses the data collector API. I think something broke in the browser here. No, let's see. Let's see if this does it. Ah, it's so set up for a good demo too. That was the coolest part of it. So anyway, something's wrong there. Let me try it once more if that works, or even if I can kind of get into the, what if I do a view? That's still, look at that. For some reason, it's showing me a bunch of HTML. It should be showing me my PowerShell runbook, which I'm not seeing. So in any event, you know where I can show it to you is right over here. This is something a little bit screwy there. That should be just showing you the script. This is actually a GitHub repository. It's a public repo, if you're familiar with GitHub, where I'm going to start building this stuff. So that's where I'm maintaining this solution that I'm currently working on. So this is, you'll be able to access it that way, and we're going to start putting things out kind of publicly like this, where you can get some good samples from that. But this one here is the script. What this does is it goes out, just uses a Yahoo web service to get some stock quotes, and then it converts it into JSON. Okay, so basically what this is doing is converting out to JSON. I think I can show you what the JSON looks like. Hopefully I can go back to the console and do that. And then it's calling this function right here that says to the OMS API ingestion. That's just kind of our nickname for this thing, is the ingestion API. What this function comes from, and this is all going to get documented, so that as if it sounds like I'm going in 100 different places. In the PowerShell gallery, this is one of a member of our cat team, Jim Britt. He actually wrote a module for using the ingestion API. If you look at the documentation I have out right now, it's a lot more detail, you know, on setting up the authentication for, you know, connecting to log analytics and configuring your data properly and the whole bit. He dropped all that in a module, which we haven't documented this module yet. We're about to, and we'll start using this in all of our samples. So once I have that module loaded into Azure Automation, which I included in my solution, so I make sure it's there, then this is the only line that I need that can send that data in, right? So basically I don't have any runbook that can send data into log analytics. Now hopefully if I do it, let's see if I do an edit and then I do test pane, let's see if it keeps my previous test run. It didn't, so that's a little strange, but that showed my previous test run there, so I could show you what the JSON looked like coming out, but not too exciting. I think we've got that in other examples. So I'm just going to see if I reconnect, if that helps. So we'll see if that helps. But to give you an idea of what these solutions look like, they're ARM templates. If you know how to create an ARM template, you pretty much know how to create a solution. And so that's what I'm showing here. They're just written in JSON. What this is the SQL Azure. If you go right now, I'll show how we get to this other one. If I go to Solutions here and I say Add, okay, and I'm going to say Azure SQL. This is another way to get solutions. This one, if you want to look at this stuff, here is a great example, is Azure SQL Analysis. Okay, and this was written by Jim Britt, who did that module, and it does some, obviously it does a lot of work with Azure SQL. This one was written with exactly as the ARM template, as exactly the solution that I'm showing here. So if I say create, a little bit more than when I'm in the OMS console. It's going to ask me for a workspace. I'm not going to walk all through this, but it'll ask me for a log analytics workspace. It'll ask me for an automation account, where my runbooks are going to go, and then any other parameters that are defined my solution will collect those, right? So what this is going to allow you to do is you'll be able to create a solution, put it in the marketplace, and have it delivered with this type of, right, user finds it very easily. They go through this very pre-configured UI in order to get it installed and configured. Okay, the other way that we're delivering these is through quick start templates. So in fact, I think Jim has exactly the same one in here, which he does. So if I click this one, okay, you can also go look at his project on GitHub. Again, we're trying to start making this stuff really available. But if I say deploy to Azure, it's not exactly the same UI, but you see still we have some UI that we're going to provide to collect that required information for it. Now, pretty much anybody, it takes to get into the Azure Marketplace, you have to have partner status. There's some hoops you have to go through. to get something to a good quality level to provide in the marketplace. But the quick start templates are really, this is more community driven, right? If you have something you find interesting, you put it out there. Once I get my stock quote one properly done, I'm going to put it out here as well, right? And again, it's just meant as a learning thing. It's not necessarily meant to be actually useful. I think there was one other thing I was going to show on. Oh, I know what I was going to show. So this is my stock quote one. Okay, and just setting things up. So again, if you're familiar with ARM templates, we define a set of resources. And so just finding a good example here. For instance, this is defining a runbook here. That's part of that one. What we have to do, of course, we don't, unlike a management pack, I'm not including the full script of the runbook in here. I'm basically providing a URL to where we get it from. So what we're starting to do, again, work out best practices and common places where I'm actually storing my PS1 file out in my GitHub repository, and then if you look here, in a variable, here is a path to my GitHub repository to go pick that up. Okay. What really makes an ARM template into a solution is this resource right here, which is a solution resource, as you can see. So what's interesting is we have all these contained resources in it. These are all of the other resources defined in the rest of the solution. This is what does that lock on them. This is what provides its packaging mechanism. If I reference one, this actually says make sure it's there, but don't take it away once you remove the solution. So this defines that ingestion module that I said my runbook was using. Well, I expect that a lot of different solutions may use that. So when I install mine, let's make sure it's there, but once we remove my solution, I don't want to take that one away in case another solution is using it. Right, so these are the types of things we're going to start putting out. Now, there's some challenges in this, right? One of the challenges we're trying to work out at the moment is we have schedules that fire our runbooks. Well, when you create a schedule, you have to define a start time. And that start time can't be in the past. So how do I put a start time in an ARM template? I don't know when this thing's going to be installed, so I don't have a time I can put in there. So when we were solving that is by including a runbook in the solution that creates the schedules for us. And we have a method that we can actually, when an ARM template gets installed, we can have a runbook that gets installed and then automatically run the runbook. The problem with that, though, is then I can't include that schedule in contained resources. So I can't stop the user from modifying. So these are some of the little things that the team is trying to work out now, whether they do some work on the back-end product to help us out, whether we start to come up with best practices. As I mentioned, this stuff is really still a work in progress. And so this is really where we currently stand. So starting to get documentation out there. I'll be tweeting when we put new things out. When I get, oh, I didn't even show my stock sample. Let me at least show it really quick, and then you can ask me whatever questions you got, just because it's kind of cool. So if I go over here and if I say type equals stock, sometimes it's the weird stuff that illustrates things the best in the management world. It gets kind of boring managing services and this and that. But if you notice, these are just all my record types for all my stock quotes, right? You can see time of day and the symbol and the day's high, the day's low. And then, of course, based on this, I created myself an alert that said if one moved by a certain percentage, say if it moves by 5%, I want to get an alert from it. I have a view that I've created here where I want to start to show, show activity over time, etc. So again, still a work in progress, but it will be one of my samples I'm going to put out for everybody to play with. So I think that's it. My apologies for my little gardener confusion and going over, but if there's questions, I'm more than happy.
That was awesome, Brian. We do have lots of questions, including if the gardener guy has left yet or not, and somebody would like to hire him.
Yeah. I probably have to go make up with him. No, not go away. So I might be mowing my lawn this weekend.
Okay. So there is, on the right-hand side in the GoToWebinar spot, there's a section titled Questions. And there's a little call out there. You can pop that up and scroll down quite far. I'm going to say,
oh, cool.
In around the time that you started your session would have been close to 3:30.
3:30. Of course, it's showing me my time where it's 1:30.
Okay, so the first one comes from Jeremy Simpson at 3:05, and he asks, are you required to have an active Azure subscription to use OMS?
Do you need an active Azure subscription when you get OMS? And I'm gonna answer this the best I can. I'm gonna give a huge qualifier that I'm really bad when it comes to pricing and those sorts of questions. You can go into Log Analytics. You can get signed up. I think we are going to, if we don't require an Azure subscription now, we will. OMS is totally running in Azure. But everything that I just showed you is free. I was just showing you all my free stuff. I mean, obviously, OMS isn't all free, but I was on the free subscriptions there, right? So if we don't require an Azure subscription today, I would think we will. Certainly do the custom solution stuff that I was doing because that doesn't appear in the OMS console.
Okay. Next question. What is the network bandwidth requirements to send this info to OMS 400 servers?
I don't know that answer off the top of my head. I will say one of the biggest questions that we get that I don't think we've done a good job answering is really exactly that. Look, help me estimate how much data I'm going to be before I go and put this in, because we are going to start charging you in terms of how much data you're going to store. I didn't show it, but in the console there, you can look at usage and you can do some predictions and that sort of thing. I don't know that answer off the top of my head. I'm writing this down, that I can forward out an answer to that if we have one. If we don't, I am taking it as an absolute to-do, because that's something that our team would be producing.
Yeah, I'll send you all the questions afterwards, Brian, related to your session, so you'll have an opportunity to provide more detailed. Simon asked,
and why, along those lines, and why I really encourage people, send me questions if you have them. If you're not able to find answers, a lot of times, even if it's obvious, sometimes it's me saying, hey, we have to do this. People want to know this. And it carries more weight if I actually have, look, I got 10 emails that asked me this. So, as we're prioritizing, that stuff can help.
Right. Some of these questions could be actually directed to John, so I'm scrolling down here a little bit. Yes.
I see one.
Okay, go ahead.
Does OMS pull in SQL logs?
Yes.
I don't believe so. So let me answer this. I don't know that specific answer. Through the data sources, no. We can't just say, hey, I have SQL logs I want to collect. Do we have a solution that will do that? I don't think so. And the reason I say don't think so is the cloud cadence is we're still really trying to keep up with, is that all of a sudden, hey, here's another solution that's out there that I didn't even know about. That's where that would come from, though, is it would come from a solution adding that. There's not one that I know of. The SQL assessment, I don't believe reads SQL logs in the way that I think you're asking. The other way to do it is obviously if you can get them with PowerShell, then I do them through the API. And that, by the way, is becoming more and more the answer. And in the OpsMan world, when we said API, it was almost like this total last resort. I can't do it through any other way, so I'm going to have to fall back on the API. This really, when we're talking about runbooks and PowerShell putting data in through the API, to me, that's the equivalent of a monitoring script in OpsMan. I mean, this is just the standard way we're doing it. And so we hear that recommendation more and more to collect data that way.
Okay, can we monitor on-prem SCOM with OMS?
Yeah, so kinda. Yeah, we do have a new. You would think that I'd know more about what is in this one, but just there's only so much time in the day for me. We actually do have a new solution for SCOM analysis. Exactly how deep it goes, I'm not sure, but we do it for a connected management group. Right, so there definitely is something there. And like I mentioned before, we are collecting stuff from the on-premise agents. We can run scripts on the on-premise agents because Azure Automation can use Hybrid Runbook Worker. And those, again, right now I can say, look, those pieces are there. we need to do a better job of putting out some samples and scenarios, et cetera, to illustrate some good examples of how that's done. So I would think, like for that specific question, I'd say look into the new SCUM assessment solution.
Okay, and Peter has a question related to OMS being purely online and concerns related to privacy and security. As I understand correctly, you send your on-premise data outside the company.
Yep.
Can you speak to that?
Yes, you do. Yeah, I mean, and really this is a much bigger question, and I'm certainly not a security expert, and I don't want to remotely pretend to be one. We have other people in our team who are, right, who are actually, Doug, you saw we have the security and compliance offering, and we have another member of our team who's doing it, and he could probably answer this question even better than I could. But you absolutely are sending your data up into the cloud. Now we're very explicit about what data we collect. You obviously have options over, the regions where that data is stored and the whole bit. But, I would think this backs up I think there are people more qualified than myself to speak of this basic concept of, kind of cloud security and where you should, different security compliances, et cetera, for sending your data. But okay. The simple answer is absolutely yes, your data is going into the cloud. And that is the entire concept of OMS.
Excellent. Artem asked about data related to OMS and how it affects SCOM performance.
I haven't been asked that one before. Oddly enough, to mine, if I just said it doesn't affect it at all, nobody would believe me, would they? I'm going to write that down. I mean, if nothing else, we should say, we may have something. We have an article that I haven't read in detail. A colleague of mine, Matt Gattell, who some people may know if you've done OpsMan he worked out in the field with me for a number of years. And he did the whole article on, the details of connecting up the management group with log analytics. And I think he has something on there, about any performance. I really haven't heard of any negative impact of it. Okay. If anything, it's going to be over on the management server, right? Because they're pretty simple MPs that are being delivered down to the agents. I mean, they're really very light MPs that are being delivered down there. But if anything, it'd be on the back end.
One more question, Brian, and then we'll let you go. This comes from Stefan, and who coincidentally won the second Xbox, so he's a happy guy. Yeah, he asked, can we get performance data out of OMS and into our own data warehouse like Graphite?
You can get out. There are some export capabilities. I mean, certainly we can push out to Power BI as one of the standard features. Every 15 minutes, run this log query, send it out to a Power BI data set. We don't necessarily have hey, I want to offload this into another data warehouse. And it really, when you think of, kind of the scales we're talking about here, I've heard that asked before. I really have not heard of anybody, there are not any particular solutions that I know of for doing it. And I don't know that we would go in that direction of providing a solution for that. I think the basic concept is, look, it's a cloud resource, right? I mean, use it in the cloud. Yeah. So I don't know. That's not to say we're not going to get a solution for it tomorrow, but I don't believe there's a solution to do that right now.
Right. Okay. Well, that's excellent. We're almost 9 minutes over overall, which is not too bad, all considered. Everything sort of tends to push back on the last one.
I'm garden for 5 of it.
We still have 100 people plus online, and that's awesome, Brian, because I'm sure they wanted to stick around and see what you had to say about OMS and John Joyner's presentation as well. So on behalf of all the attendees today, well, first of all, let me thank you guys for joining us and staying online. We have many, many people outside North America, and I know it's late in your evening as well. So thank you to you guys for hanging tight, and to everybody else. And on behalf of all the attendees, Brian, thank you. We really appreciate your participation in our MP University event once again. And I think today's was very unique and some new topics, and I think that was appreciated by the community. So we will be circulating links to the recordings. It takes time to process all of that information. So as soon as the recordings are available, we'll send that out. There will be a follow-up with a link to download an evaluation copy of MP Studio, which supports all the advanced authoring stuff as well. And in terms of any of this other stuff we talked about, Power BI, OMS, help with development of any of the other things you may need, like management packs, certainly you can send me an email or info@silac.com, and we'd be happy to help out. On that note, we'll be closing the session momentarily, and you should see a pop-up with a survey. I believe that survey will get emailed to you as well. We really appreciate everybody filling that out. Thank you once again, Brian, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and drop off. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.